I think it's an incredibly difficult job to do it, and the larger the organisation, the more complex it is and the more difficult it is to do. Because you've got to combine two things simultaneously and do them very well, which means you've got to be a dreamer, a visionary, and you've got to be a doer.
Hello and welcome to this week's Tea Break. I'm Al-Enazi, joined as always by my co-host Yuri. Today we're thrilled to be speaking with Wlliam Proger, founder of London-based private investment office Wlliam & Partners. Wlliam, how are you?
Really well, thanks very much. Good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming. And what tea have you gone for?
I've gone for Earl Grey, being a good Englishman.
Nice.
Technically speaking, I should of course be drinking it in the afternoon and probably with lemon and not milk if we're going to be really fussy about it. But I've got some milk in there and it's very nice, thank you.
Fantastic. Yuri?
Well, I'm glad to hear somebody who knows their teas and the etiquette around the tea as well. I've gone for the coffee today, breaking with the tradition.
You've done that a couple of times.
I have, and you know, today I'm trying to keep up with you youngsters. I don't have the energy anymore, and you know, if you look at Wlliam, despite the youthful good looks and the vibrancy, he's already done the rounds of all the wealth managers. He's worked at Seahor, at Barclays Wealth, at Mirabaud.
Wlliam, you spent some time at Mirabaud. You know, is there really a different vibe at these smaller partnership-owned private banks compared to the likes of Barclays?
Well, I think it can be. It absolutely can be. But I think the received wisdom is that they are slower, more genteel, that they can be quite often more long-term, where there are very good grounds to think that a lot of the big organisations that are shareholder-owned are much more short-termist in their nature. And I think that can be true. But the interesting point about culture, which I think goes to the heart of your question, which is something that is in these organisations is set from the top and slightly informed, and in a lot of cases informed by history, is that can vary not just because of the ownership structure, but it can vary hugely because of where the geography of the HQ is. When I worked at Barclays, we were in the HQ in the UK, close lines of communication, you always felt that you were in the centre of power. When you work for, I think, some of these other organisations, whether or not they are shareholder-owned or they are privately owned by a family, if you're in the spoke, if you like, rather than the hub of it, that can be a very different feeling. And we should not make any mistake that just because they're family-owned, they are any less commercial than the big organisations. In fact, actually, some of them are almost ruthlessly more so.
You've been writing about leadership, cultures and different visions of CEOs. What are your thoughts on this?
I've been writing about leadership for a long, long time, you know, 30, 40 years. And I've met some fascinating leaders in my time. And there was the one that sticks out. There's a CEO of one of the big French banks, and he was always smoking his pipe in the office. And you know, the staff, none of them could handle being in there for long. Yeah. So the people who'd rise up the ladder would be the people who'd be able to handle that pipe tobacco. But there was another French leader, Gilles Lichtenstein, who was CEO of BNP Paribas Asset Management. Sadly, he died in his early 40s, and we used to have some great conversations with him. He was a big fan of science fiction, of Star Trek in particular, and he said to me, Yuri, I always follow the words of Mr. Spock. The good of the many is more important than the good of the few. And he'd be treating his staff and his clients in that way. And one of the interviews I've done recently was with the Bank of New York wealth management boss, Jose Minaya. And you can see that the rivals really fear him because he's a master of these soft skills, which many of them haven't really invested in. Wlliam, what are the key lessons you've learned from some of the leaders that you've worked for?
I think it's an incredibly difficult job to do it, and the larger the organisation, the more complex it is and the more difficult it is to do. Because you've got to combine two things simultaneously and do them very well, which means you've got to be a dreamer, a visionary, and you've got to be a doer. So you've got to be naturally comfortable with a very high level of detail, and you've got to be able to set a vision, and a vision that is very clear and that people will understand and get behind the flag on. And the point that you made, Yuri, about treating your staff and your clients well is I think, a key leadership quality. The sad truth about it is that I think in financial services, and whether or not that's investment banking or it's wealth management, is there are a lot of people in leadership positions who are there by appointment and who are managers and think they are leaders. And there are very few people in management positions, actually, who are genuinely cut out to be leaders. And we could have a debate for the next 2 hours of whether or not leaders are born or made.
And it's fascinating because the further we go into the realms of the technical technological revolution, the more important the personal skills are becoming. And Ali, we've seen some of our recent coverage, including a piece by Elliot Shadforth of EY, and indeed in a piece you recently wrote about the succession planning disconnect. There's no longer a certainty that the next generations are staying with the existing wealth manager of their parents or grandparents. Is this a feeling you've been getting?
Well, why should we be surprised in an industry dominated by brands? And whether or not you're in wealth management or consumer goods, brands have an incredible value to them. And it's as true in wealth management as I think it is in any other sector. I think that, and what we observe through the consultancy business, we do a lot of work with clients in this space, and we help them make these decisions. We help them allocate capital, and we help them appoint and in some cases fire providers, is that there is now increasingly, because of the information age in which we live, a clear concept in the minds of the clients that the very big organisations are distribution models first and advice second. Not all of them, but that is a major turn-off to people who are very smart, who have made a huge amount of money, very often in successful businesses where they've had sales functions and they've been able to be an observer of that within their own organisations. And they're onto it. They're onto it. So does that mean that they stop using very large organisations, typically banks? No, it doesn't. But it does mean that they see them now more as a utility function, actually, than an advisor.
Elisa, our colleague, she's been looking at some of the initiatives from wealth managers about how they're communicating with the next generation. And Merrill Lynch, for instance, they're sending families back to the classroom, Ali, to be re-educated in financial literacy.
Well, the teachers that they have at the Centre for Family Wealth in New York are former educators, they're lawyers, they're family consultants who work across generations. So they're taking this very seriously. And William, nearly every bank now organises, these programmes, and you've seen many of them. Do they really vary in their quality?
Yes, hugely. It tends to be the preserve of the bigger organisations because they have the people and the resources to do it. And I think that the programmes are always well-intentioned. The execution of them varies. That's your point, I think. I think the real issue with it, with Next Generation, is that what they want to see is the organisation of tomorrow. And what they see when they go in is the organisation of today and yesteryear. And I think a lot of the Next Generation say, well, look, by the time I get to the point that I'm making a decision on this, and I might be starting to influence the decision, but I'm not yet there. I want to know what you're going to look like tomorrow.
Ali, you've been speaking to a lot of these wealth tech leaders. What have they been telling you?
So at the recent, PWM Wealth Tech Awards, the panel discussion we had, they've all agreed that digital transformation in wealth management hinges on people, not platforms. Success demands digital leadership, employee buy-in, and ethical AI use. But there are concerns. There are some concerns that remain around, inequality and the need for inclusive, human-centered digital strategies. And William, do clients really care about how good the technology is at the banks that they use, or is it expertise in areas such as investment and philanthropy that indeed, their ability to communicate and explain what is the most important thing?
Well, it all matters, and it all matters in different ways to different people because they've all got different requirements. But the world is moving, as we know, at an incredibly fast pace, and I think financial services are traditionally slightly behind the curve on this. There are some that are more advanced than others. I think we're probably I'll stick my neck out here, about 2 to 3 years away from a scenario where your tech panel will envisage today, which is that there will be a search box on the front end of their online access, whether that's through their phone on an app or it's on a desktop, which will allow them to put it into a search term. Tell me about my US dollar exposure in my portfolio. How much exposure have I got to oil when things are flaring up in the Middle East? What's my exposure to a bank if it's getting into trouble? Okay, what's my performance over the last 60 days? Not natural terms traditionally that are reported on performance. And that technology exists now. I've seen it. It's there.
Thank you so much, William. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
That's all from us for this week. You can find this episode and all our others on the PWM website or over on our YouTube channel. And if you've got questions for our guests or just want to dig deep into the conversation, you'll find everything you need online. See you next week.